I want you to think back to a time when you were talking to a woman, a friend, a potential partner. It doesn't matter who. The conversation seemed to be going just fine, flowing naturally, and then it happened. She asked a question that felt a little off. Maybe it was a seemingly innocent, "What do you do on your days off?" Or a more direct, "Do you have any friends who are girls?" It wasn't the question itself, but the way it landed. It felt less like a genuine inquiry and more like a test, a way of poking and prodding to see how you would react. I've seen it countless times in my line of work. People think they're hiding their intentions, but the truth always leaks out. It's in the subtle shifts in their voice, the quick glance to see your face, the almost imperceptible tensing of their posture. They're running a small-scale interrogation of their own, and most of you don't even realize you on the witness stand until it's too late. The key isn't to get angry or defensive. That's exactly the reaction they're looking for, the one that confirms their biases. The key is to see the test for what it is, a shortcut they're taking to figure out if you're a decent person, a worthy partner, a valuable friend. My job isn't to teach you how to pass the test. That's a fool's errand. My job is to teach you how to recognize it, understand what it's truly asking, and then give an honest answer that leaves no room for doubt. You see, these tests aren't about being tricky or malicious. They're often born from a place of genuine curiosity, or more commonly, a history of getting hurt. Let me tell you about Margaret. Margaret was a woman I consulted on a case once, a sharp, successful lawyer who had a string of failed relationships. Every new guy she met, she'd hit them with the, "Are you close with your family?" question on the first or second date. She wasn't just making small talk. She was trying to see if they had a stable foundation, if they valued loyalty, if they had the emotional intelligence to navigate complex relationships. Her last ex had been a complete loner, an emotional black hole who never spoke to his parents, and it had been a nightmare for her. So, for Margaret, this wasn't a game, it was a way of protecting herself from repeating a painful pattern. The test itself was just a symptom of her past pain. It's a fundamental misunderstanding to believe these tests are always traps. They are often a shortcut to an answer. The other person is too afraid to ask directly. Are you emotionally available? Can I trust you? Do you have my back? They're looking for a signal that you're safe, that you're not going to be another source of disappointment. I've seen men get so focused on winning the conversation that they miss the human being on the other side of the table who is just trying to find a reason to feel secure. The pragmatic approach isn't about being perfect, it's about being honest and direct, but in a way that respects their underlying concern. For instance, if she asks, "What do you do for fun?" and you're an avid gamer, don't just say, "I play video games." Expand on it. Say something like, "I'm a big fan of strategy games. They're like a mental workout for me. It's a great way to unwind and connect with friends online." You've answered her question, and at the same time, you've shown you're capable of self-reflection and communication. You've transformed a potential point of judgment into an opportunity for genuine connection. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you had to lie or embellish to impress someone, only to feel hollow afterward? That hollow feeling is your gut telling you that you failed the real test, the test of being true to yourself. So, how do you spot the difference between a genuine concern and a test? It's not as complicated as you might think. A genuine concern is open-ended and collaborative. It sounds like, "What are your thoughts on having a family someday?" A test is often a little more pointed, more like a legal deposition. It sounds like, "Do you think you'll ever get married and have kids?" One is an invitation to a conversation, the other is a demand for a specific answer. I remember a case I was on years ago with a man named David. David had a habit of trying to pass these kinds of tests by telling women exactly what he thought they wanted to hear. The problem was, he was a terrible liar. His posture would tighten, his voice would get a little higher, and he'd start fidgeting with his hands. I saw the same tells in a woman he was dating. She'd ask him something like, "Do you ever get jealous?" And he'd immediately say, "No, never," with a face that screamed the exact opposite. She saw right through it. To her, the lie wasn't just a lie, it was a sign that he was insecure, that he couldn't be trusted. The real test wasn't about whether he got jealous, but about whether he was honest enough to admit it. My advice to him was simple. The next time she asks you something that feels like a trap, don't try to win the game. Just tell the truth. If you get jealous sometimes, just say, "You know, I do sometimes, but I've been working on it and I think it's important to talk about those feelings instead of bottling them up." He did, and it completely changed the dynamic of their relationship. The shift was immediate. She saw his honesty as a sign of strength, not weakness. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you had to choose between being honest and being liked? The right answer is always to be honest. It's the only way to build a real foundation. Trying to be liked by everyone is how you end up liked by no one. The litmus test for a test isn't in the words, but in the feeling behind them. Does the question make you feel defensive? Does it feel like a trap? If so, it's probably a test. Now, when you recognize one of these tests, you have a choice to make. You can either fail it by getting defensive, or you can pass it by demonstrating genuine emotional intelligence. The key isn't to provide a perfect answer, but to provide a human one. Let's talk about the common loyalty test, which often sounds like, "What do you think about your ex?" or "Are you friends with your exes?" A defensive response would be something like, "I don't even talk to them anymore. They were crazy." This tells her you have unresolved issues, you're not good at handling conflict, and you're not a reliable narrator of your own history. An authentic, confidence-boosting response, however, would be something like, "We ended things on good terms. We weren't a good fit romantically, but I still wish them the best." This shows that you're mature, you can handle conflict, and you're not afraid of your past. I had a client named Ben who was stuck in this loop. He'd get asked about his ex-girlfriend, and he'd immediately go on the offensive. He'd list all her flaws, all the reasons she was the problem, and he'd feel like he was winning the conversation. But the woman he was talking to would hear all of this and realize that he wasn't able to take responsibility for his own part in the breakup. He was a human alarm bell screaming, "I'm not a safe partner." We worked on a new script for him, one that focused on emotional ownership. Instead of saying, "She was crazy," he learned to say, "We had some communication issues, and I probably didn't handle things as well as I could have." It was a learning experience for me. The results were night and day. He started having deeper, more meaningful conversations because he was no longer operating from a place of fear. He was operating from a place of authenticity. Have you ever noticed that the most confident people are the ones who can admit their own flaws without flinching? That's not a weakness, that's a superpower. It's the ultimate response to any test. Let's dive into some specific frameworks and psychological strategies for handling these situations. The first principle is something I call the pivot. When you're hit with a test, you don't answer the question directly. Instead, you pivot to the underlying concern. For example, if she asks, "Why haven't you had a serious relationship in a while?" A defensive response would be, "I've just been busy with work." A direct but still unhelpful response would be, "I haven't met the right person." The pivot, however, would be, "That's a fair question. I've been focused on my career for a bit, but I'm at a point now where I'm ready to find someone to build something real with." I think it's important to be intentional about who you let into your life, don't you? You've not only answered her question, but you've also addressed her real concern, which is, are you emotionally available? And are you looking for something serious? You've turned a potential landmine into a collaborative conversation about values. I worked with a guy named Leo who was terrified of this particular test. He was a successful entrepreneur, but he was convinced that women would see his lack of a long-term relationship as a red flag. The more he tried to deflect, the more suspicious they became. We practiced the pivot by having him reframe his narrative. Instead of making excuses, he started talking about his intentionality, his growth, and his readiness for a meaningful connection. The result was that he went from feeling like he was always on trial to feeling like he was in charge of his own story. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you had to defend your life choices? The truth is, you don't. You only have to explain them, and there's a big difference between the two. Another powerful tool is what I call the reflection. This is where you don't just answer the question, but you reflect it back in a way to create a shared dialogue. Let's take the "what do you do on your days off?" test. A simple one-word answer like "nothing" or "watch TV" tells her you're boring. A better, more thoughtful answer would be, "I'm a big fan of old movies. I just watched The Godfather for the 10th time. Have you ever seen it?" You've answered the question, and in the same breath, you've opened a new line of conversation and given her a chance to connect with you. The real power of this technique is that it subtly shifts the dynamic from an interrogation to a conversation. I once consulted on a case where a man, let's call him Alex, was constantly getting hit with this kind of test. He was an introvert, and his favorite thing to do was read. Every time a woman would ask him what he did for fun, he would get defensive and say, "I just stay in and read." He was convinced that no one would find that interesting, and so he'd shut down the conversation. The test wasn't about whether he read or not. The test was about whether he was interesting. We worked on the reflection for him. He started saying, "I just finished a book on the history of the Roman Empire. It was fascinating. Have you ever been to Rome?" Suddenly, he wasn't just a guy who stayed in and read, he was an intellectual with a passion for history. The conversation wasn't about him anymore. It was about the Roman Empire, about travel, about shared interests. The conversation became a bridge, not a wall. Have you ever noticed that people are drawn to people who are passionate about something, anything? That passion is the ultimate trump card in any of these tests. It shows that you have a rich inner world, and that's the most attractive thing of all.